When Lakhmi Pichai was humiliated, Sundar Pichai's respect and Narendra Modi's wisdom turned insult into pride. The evening was calm, yet inside the grand luxury hall every step felt heavy. Chandeliers sparkled above, glasses clinked, and people whispered in circles of wealth and pride. It was one of those places where appearance mattered more than heart, and where silence could sometimes cut deeper than words. Lakhmi Pichai entered quietly, her steps soft, her presence simple. She wore nothing loud, only a graceful sari that spoke of tradition more than fashion. Her eyes carried calmness, but her smile was nervous because she could already sense the eyes turning toward her, judging her, measuring her. The crowd was filled with important figures, business leaders, wealthy families, and dignitaries. Sundar Pichai had been invited to speak later in the evening, but before he arrived, Lakhmi found herself standing alone near the reception desk. The host, dressed in a fine black suit, looked at her with suspicion. He scanned her from head to toe, his smile forced. "Are you sure you are at the right place?" he asked in a tone that was sharp but polite enough to sound acceptable. His words were covered with courtesy, but his eyes carried insult. Some nearby guests chuckled softly. Others stared, pretending to sip their drinks while watching the moment unfold. Lakhmi's hands tightened around her small clutch. Her heart beat faster, yet she stayed calm. She had faced silence before. She had felt the weight of eyes that doubted her worth, but here it felt different. Here, she was not just a guest being judged, she was the wife of a man respected across the world. Yet the host could not see beyond her simple clothes and quiet nature. One woman whispered to another, "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Those words floated in the air, reaching Lakhmi's ears like a knife. She felt a sting, but she did not respond. She looked down for a moment, then lifted her gaze again. Her silence carried dignity, but the insult was sharp enough to make her wonder if she should walk away. Then the doors of the hall opened. Sundar Pichai walked in, calm as always, his steps measured, his face humble. The crowd turned, the whispers shifted, and suddenly all attention moved to him. Sundar's eyes searched the hall until they found Lakhmi. In that moment, he saw not just his wife standing alone, but the pain in her eyes, the unease in her smile, the unspoken insult floating in the air. He did not rush. He walked slowly but firmly, each step carrying purpose. When he reached her side, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His eyes turned to the host, and in that silence, the host's face lost color. Sundar's words came slowly, simple, but heavy. "This is my wife, Lakhmi. If this place is too small to respect her, then this place is too small to respect me." The hall fell silent. The laughter stopped. Every eye turned down for a moment. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the air was no longer bright. Sundar did not shout. He did not argue, yet his words carried the weight of truth. The host stuttered, trying to cover his mistake, but it was too late. The crowd had seen. The crowd had heard. Before the silence grew heavier, another figure entered. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had arrived for the event. The hall straightened. People adjusted their clothes, but Modi's sharp eyes noticed the atmosphere, the stiffness, the sudden change. He saw Sundar and Lakhmi standing together, and he sensed what had just happened. Walking towards them, Modi's voice broke the silence. "Respect is not about chandeliers or suits. Respect is about the way we treat one another. If a woman like Lakhmi, who has walked every step with dignity, is questioned in this hall, then this hall has failed its purpose." His words were not loud, yet they carried across every corner. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down in shame. Sundar's hand remained on Lakhmi's shoulder, his presence steady, his love clear. Lakhmi's eyes softened, though her heart still carried the weight of the insult. She now felt a shield around her. The evening had only begun, but the lesson was already stronger than the speeches planned. A moment of humiliation had turned into a moment of truth. What began as a quiet insult was now a reflection for everyone present. And in that first hour, as the music resumed and the whispers faded, the story of respect, humility, and wisdom had only just begun. The night still carried many twists, and the journey was far from over, but the seed was planted. A seed that would soon grow into something far greater, something unforgettable. The whispers in the hall. The music played softly again, violins filling the air, but the sound could not erase the tension that had already been born in the hall. The crowd tried to move on, yet every step they took was heavier than before. They had just seen Sundar stand beside Lakhmi with strength, and they had heard Modi's words strike through the pride of the place. People smiled, but their smiles were forced. They spoke, but their voices trembled with unease. Lakhmi stood quietly, still holding her clutch, her fingers tracing its edge. She was not angry, but she was shaken. Years of simplicity had taught her patience, but the sting of that moment was sharp. She did not want to create a scene, yet the scene had already been created for her. Sundar noticed her silence, and his heart ached. He leaned closer, whispering gently, "You don't have to prove anything here. Your dignity is already greater than this hall." Those words brought her some comfort, but inside, doubts still swirled. She wondered why respect was always measured by clothes, by wealth, by the sparkle of gold and silver. She wondered how many others had felt the same silent cut in places like this. Meanwhile, Narendra Modi had moved towards the stage. Before his official speech could begin, he paused, scanning the hall once more. His eyes rested on faces that had laughed earlier, faces that had judged without mercy. He did not point at them, but his silence made them restless. Then he spoke, not with prepared notes, but with truth. "We are quick to applaud success," he said, "but slow to honor the journey that makes success possible. Behind every achievement, there is sacrifice, there is patience, and there is a hand that holds steady when storms come. Tonight, we are not here to measure wealth or appearance. We are here to remember what true respect means." The hall listened, many avoiding his eyes. Some nodded as if agreeing, though deep inside they were only trying to hide their guilt. Others felt genuinely moved, realizing the mistake they had silently joined by judging Lakhmi only moments ago. But as Modi spoke, another layer of tension grew. In the far corner of the hall, a group of powerful businessmen whispered to each other. Their eyes were sharp, their words low, but their expressions revealed irritation. They were not comfortable with this shift in mood. They had come to the event to show wealth, to display power, not to be reminded of humility. One of them, a man known for arrogance, muttered, "Respect is a fine word for speeches, but respect does not build empires." His companions smirked, but Sundar noticed. He saw the whispers. He saw the pride still burning in those men, and he knew the night was not over. The humiliation had already turned into reflection, but resistance remained. Sundar's mind stayed calm, yet he could sense that this moment would test not only his love for Lakhmi, but also his own values in front of people who had power, money, and arrogance combined. As the night continued, waiters served dishes with silver spoons, and laughter returned in patches. But behind every smile, there was still tension. Lakhmi stayed close to Sundar, her silence deep but graceful. Sundar held her hand for a moment, a simple gesture, but one that spoke louder than all the voices around them. Then, just as Modi finished his opening words and invited Sundar to speak, another unexpected moment arrived. One of the businessmen from the corner stepped forward, his steps bold, his voice louder than needed. "Mr. Pichai," he said, We all know your success. We admire your position. But respect in this hall is earned by presence, by display, by what we can see. Do you really believe simplicity alone can stand equal here? The crowd froze again. Spoons stopped mid-air, glasses lowered, and all eyes turned once more. The tension grew heavier than before. Lakhmi's heart sank for a moment, for she realized the insult had returned, but this time it was wrapped inside a challenge. Sundar looked at the man with steady eyes. He did not rush to answer. Instead, he walked to the stage slowly, holding Lakhmi's hand as he stepped forward. The hall watched in silence, waiting, wondering if Sundar would fight back with pride or step back with quiet surrender. His voice finally rose, calm but sharp. Simplicity is not weakness. Respect is not decoration. I stand here with my wife because she is not less than any diamond in this hall. If you believe presence is built on wealth, then you have already lost the meaning of dignity. Gasps echoed softly. Some clapped, though uncertain. The businessman smirked, as if expecting such a response. But before the air could settle, Modi's voice broke through again, firm and unshaken. "Let us see," Modi said, "whose words stand. Stronger by the end of this night, arrogance or respect." The challenge was now clear. The hall was no longer a simple gathering. It had become a stage where pride and humility would clash, where insult would face dignity, and where every moment would decide whose truth would remain. And as the music stopped once again, the journey of the night took a deeper turn, pulling everyone into a storm of respect, pride, and the unspoken battles of the heart. The challenge of pride, the hall was silent again, as if every sound had been stolen. Sundar's words still floated in the air, sharp yet calm, and Modi's firm voice had drawn a line that no one could ignore. Respect or arrogance. That was now the hidden test of the night. People shifted in their chairs, some pretending to be at ease, others waiting for the next spark. The businessman who had stepped forward, Rajiv Singhania, was known across cities as a man of wealth and power. He had built his empire on deals that many whispered about but never questioned openly. Arrogance had become his shield, and pride was the crown he wore in every gathering. To him, Sundar's calm dignity looked like weakness, and Lakhmi's simplicity looked like absence of worth. Rajiv smiled coldly, his voice carrying through the hall. "Mr. Pichai, words are good for books and speeches, but this is the real world. In the real world, respect comes when people see greatness in what you own, not in what you say. Tonight, people came to witness power, not humility. Can humility impress them?" His question was not asked for an answer. It was thrown like a weapon, meant to wound, meant to pull laughter from those who still followed his lead. A few people chuckled softly, though their eyes darted nervously toward Modi, who stood watching with quiet strength. Lakhmi felt her heart tighten again. She was not afraid of Rajiv, but the sharpness of his words reminded her of the earlier insult. She wondered if this night would continue to tear at her dignity. Sundar, however, remained calm. His silence was not surrender. It was patience. He knew that in a battle of respect and pride, words spoken at the right moment mattered more than loud declarations. Modi stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Rajiv. "True greatness does not need to be displayed. It is felt," he said softly, yet his tone carried like thunder. "Wealth can buy eyes for a moment, but respect wins hearts forever. Tonight is not about your empire, Rajiv. It is about what values we leave behind." The hall grew restless. Some nodded. Others avoided looking at Rajiv. But Rajiv was not ready to bend. He straightened his coat, his smirk returning. "Values are fine, Prime Minister, but let us see how far they take a man in a hall full of power." He turned to the guests and raised his glass. "Tell me, friends, what do you see when you look at this couple?" His hand gestured towards Sundar and Lakhmi. "Do you see the strength of presence, or do you see weakness dressed in simplicity?" The question was cruel, and for a moment, silence spread. No one dared to answer, yet their hesitation was loud. Some shifted uncomfortably, others looked down, but Rajiv's words had planted doubt. Lakhmi's eyes lowered. Her fingers tightened around her clutch. Her heart whispered, maybe it was wrong to come here. Maybe she did not belong. But before the weight could crush her spirit, Sundar stepped forward to the stage, still holding her hand. His voice rose, steady and calm. "You ask what they see," he said. "Let them see not the clothes we wear, but the journey we walked. Let them see not the sparkle of stones, but the strength of sacrifice. Lakhmi stood with me when we had nothing, when our dreams were just shadows. Today, if people respect my name, it is because of the quiet strength she gave me. If this hall cannot see that, then this hall is blind." A wave of silence struck again. This time it was heavier, some eyes filled with respect, others with shame. Even those who had chuckled earlier felt their hearts shift. Rajiv's smirk faltered for a moment, though he quickly masked it with laughter. "Beautiful words, Sundar," Rajiv said. "But let us see if they can hold against the reality of this night." Modi's eyes narrowed slightly, watching the game Rajiv was trying to play. He knew the night was turning into a deeper test, one where Sundar and Lakhmi's dignity would be measured not just by words, but by actions yet to come. And in that moment, the hall no longer felt like a celebration. It had become a silent battlefield, where respect stood on one side and pride on the other. The outcome was not yet written, but every heartbeat carried suspense. Every glance carried weight. As the night moved forward, the story was no longer about a single insult. It had become about something larger, the fight to remind the world what true respect means. The storm inside the hall glittered with chandeliers, yet the light felt dimmer now. Laughter had faded, replaced by uneasy whispers. Rajiv Singhania leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink with arrogance, as if he had already won the night. Sundar stood calmly on the stage, Lakhmi by his side, while Modi watched every face in the hall, his eyes reading truths that mouths refused to speak. For a moment, silence stretched too long. The guests, caught between fear of offending, Rajiv and respect for Sundar, hesitated to choose sides. Sundar's words had touched hearts, but pride was still strong in the room, and Rajiv knew how to use hesitation. He rose again, his voice sharp. "Words can move hearts, yes, but let us see if they can move reality. Sundar, you speak of dignity, but tell me, will dignity feed families? Will simplicity build nations? Or is it just a story people tell themselves to feel good?" Some nodded quietly, agreeing without courage to speak. Others frowned, but stayed silent. Rajiv's words had created doubt, and doubt was powerful in a hall where people measured life with wealth. Lakhmi felt a sting again, but this time she did not lower her eyes. She remembered Sundar's hand on her shoulder, the shield he had given her, and the words Modi had spoken earlier about true respect. She breathed deeply and whispered, "I am not afraid, Sundar. If he questions, let him question. Truth will answer him." Those words gave Sundar strength, but before he could reply, something unexpected happened. From the far back of the hall, a soft voice rose. It belonged to an elderly woman dressed simply, unnoticed until now. Her hair was silver, her sari faded, but her presence was steady. "Respect is not about wealth," she said. Her voice trembled with age, but her words carried strength. "I have seen men with palaces who were forgotten, and I have seen women with nothing who were remembered for kindness. Tonight, I see a woman who carries dignity in silence. That is more valuable than any diamond." The hall turned toward her. Some were surprised she dared to speak. Others were uneasy. Rajiv's face darkened, for he had not expected anyone to interrupt his play. Modi smiled faintly, nodding in respect to the old woman. "Truth often comes from the simplest voices," he said. Rajiv, however, laughed coldly. "So now we will measure success by tears and stories? How convenient." He turned to Sundar again. "Prove it. If you believe respect is stronger than wealth, show this hall something that cannot be questioned." The challenge was open now. Everyone leaned forward, waiting. Sundar looked at Lakhmi, then at the guests, then finally at Modi. His calm did not break, though he knew this was no longer about a single insult. It was about turning the entire hall toward a forgotten truth. Sundar stepped closer to the microphone, his voice steady. "Respect is not proved by display. It is proved by the way people stand for each other in the hardest moments. My wife has walked with me through storms no one here has seen. Tonight, if you want proof, then do not look at jewels or clothes. Look at the strength it takes to hold dignity in silence while being insulted. That is proof enough." His words echoed, but Rajiv was ready. He raised his glass again, smirking. "Beautiful, Sundar, but I fear your poetry cannot win against the power of this hall. Let us see how long your truth holds." At that moment, a sudden commotion stirred near the entrance. The doors opened again, and a group of journalists walked in, cameras flashing, notebooks ready. They had been invited to cover the speeches, but the timing was perfect for Rajiv. With the media watching, he believed he could turn the narrative to his side. The hall tensed again. Sundar, Lakhmi, and Modi stood steady, but they knew the storm had just grown larger. Whatever happened next would not only echo through the hall, it would reach beyond its walls. And as the cameras focused, everyone realized this was no longer a private moment. The battle of respect and pride had just stepped onto a stage for the world to see. The weight of the cameras, the sudden flash of cameras filled the grand hall, scattering light across every corner. The whispers grew louder. People adjusted their clothes nervously, and Rajiv Singhania's smirk widened. He had waited for this moment. With journalists now inside, he believed the power of his wealth and presence would overshadow Sundar's quiet words and Lakhmi's silent strength. The reporters quickly moved forward, their pens ready, microphones raised. One of them spoke, loudly. "Mr. Pichai, Prime Minister Modi, tonight we hear talk about respect and simplicity, but others say this is a hall of wealth, of success. What is the true meaning of dignity here?" The hall froze again. Every guest knew that whatever was said now would be written in tomorrow's headlines, seen on screens across the country. Rajiv leaned back, certain Sundar would falter. Before Sundar could speak, Rajiv stepped into the circle of cameras. "Dignity is important, yes," he said smoothly, his voice polished for the media. "But dignity without success is just a dream. Success builds nations. Wealth creates opportunities. Look around. This hall is full of achievers, people who shaped industries, not with words, but with power. That is true respect." He spread his arms, inviting applause. Some clapped weakly, more out of fear than belief. The journalists scribbled notes, their cameras focused sharply on him. Rajiv looked satisfied, convinced his version of truth was winning. Then Sundar stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood in the glow of the lights, his hand still, holding Lakhmi's. "Success without respect is empty," he said. "Wealth without kindness is hollow. You ask what dignity means here. It means standing by those who give you strength, even when the world tries to shame them. My wife has faced insult tonight, yet she carries silence with more grace than all. The gold in this room. If this is not dignity, then we have forgotten what the word means." The hall grew quiet. The cameras clicked faster, reporters leaning in. The contrast between Rajiv's loud pride and Sundar's calm truth was clear, and people began to shift again in their hearts. But Rajiv was not finished. He laughed loudly, breaking the silence. "Beautiful lines for the headlines, Sundar. But tell me, will the world remember your wife's silence, or will they remember the power of those who stand above? Let us test it." He turned to the reporters. "Ask the guests here," he said, his voice sharp. "Who do they respect more tonight, the man who talks of humility or the ones who built empires with power?" The hall tensed once more. "No," one wanted to answer. The guests looked at each other, fear in their eyes. If they supported Sundar, they risked angering Rajiv, whose influence stretched far beyond this hall. If they supported Rajiv, they would deny the truth they had just felt in Sundar's words. A heavy silence followed. Cameras turned, waiting. Rajiv smiled, certain no one would dare speak. Then, unexpectedly, a young waiter who had been serving quietly stepped forward. His hands shook as he held the tray, but his voice, though soft, carried across the hall. "Sir," he said, looking at Sundar, "when you spoke, I felt respect. When you held your wife's hand, I saw strength. I may not have wealth, but I know what dignity looks like. Tonight I see it in you both." The hall gasped. Reporters turned their cameras toward the boy, surprised that someone so small in status had spoken. Modi's eyes softened, a faint smile crossing his face. Lakhmi's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, but of quiet pride. Rajiv's face darkened, his smirk broken for the first time. He tried to laugh it off, but the silence of the crowd told him the shift had begun. One small voice had cut through the weight of his empire, and it had been heard by all. The night was not over, but the ground beneath Rajiv's arrogance was beginning to shake. The battle of respect and pride was turning not by power, but by unexpected voices that rose when least expected. And as the flashes continued, the story grew larger than the hall itself. It was no longer just a gathering, no longer just a speech. It was becoming a lesson the whole world would soon witness. The cracks of arrogance, Rajiv Singhania's glass trembled slightly in his hand, though he tried to hide it behind another smirk. The young waiter's words had pierced the armor of his pride more deeply than Sundar's calm answers ever could. It was one thing to face a man of power on the stage, but another to be challenged by someone invisible in the eyes of the wealthy. It exposed a truth he could not silence. Respect was not chained to wealth. It could rise even from the quietest voices. The cameras kept flashing, hungry for every reaction. The reporters had caught the moment, their pens moving fast. Rajiv's empire was strong, but he could feel control slipping. For a man like him, losing attention was worse than losing money. He raised his voice quickly, hoping to drown out the truth. "So now we let servants decide what dignity is?" he sneered, his words sharp like knives. "Respect should not be defined by those who serve us, but by those who lead. If we allow every weak voice to define greatness, we will lose the meaning of success." His tone was cruel, and for a second some guests chuckled nervously, trying to please him. But others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the bitterness behind his words. Modi's eyes narrowed, the disappointment clear in his expression. Sundar did not speak yet. He only glanced at the waiter who stood frozen, unsure if he had made a mistake. Sundar stepped down from the stage and walked toward him slowly. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said softly but loud enough for all to hear, "Never be ashamed for speaking truth. Dignity does not come from where you stand in the hall. Dignity comes from what you carry in your heart." The hall stirred again, many guests now nodding quietly. The waiter's eyes filled with tears, and he lowered his head in gratitude. Rajiv's smirk broke further. He needed control back. His voice rose, louder than before. "Then let us settle this once and for all," he shouted. If respect is truly what you say, Sundar, then prove it here before everyone. If humility is stronger than wealth, then let this hall decide. I will open a challenge. Let the people here vote. Let them choose whether they follow your idea of respect or my truth of power. Gasps filled the room. The suggestion was dangerous, risky, and raw. Turning the night into a public vote meant exposing everyone's hidden beliefs. No one could hide behind silence anymore. Modi's eyes hardened. Be careful, Rajiv. You are not calling for truth. You are calling for spectacle. Respect is not won by votes in a hall. It is lived in actions across a life. But Rajiv ignored him. He looked at the reporters, knowing they would seize on the drama. Let the people decide, he repeated, his voice echoing. Respect or wealth? Which is greater? The hall was divided. Some nodded eagerly, entertained by the idea of a public choice. Others shifted nervously, not wanting their opinions exposed. Sundar looked at Lakhmi. She did not flinch. Her eyes, though soft, carried strength. Truth does not fear judgment, she whispered. Sundar squeezed her hand and then turned toward the hall. Very well, he said calmly. Let them decide. But remember this. Every choice you make tonight will follow you outside these walls. The world is listening, and history remembers not wealth, but values. A heavy silence filled the hall. Cameras focused tighter. Guests exchanged glances. Some hearts leaned toward Rajiv's pride, others toward Sundar's dignity. The night had transformed into something larger than anyone had expected. As Modi looked across the hall, he saw more than a choice between two men. He saw a test of the nation's heart itself. Would they choose arrogance dressed in gold, or humility carried in silence? And just as the tension reached its highest point, the doors of the hall opened once again. A figure none expected stepped inside, carrying a presence that made the whispers stop instantly. The night was about to take another turn, one that neither Sundar nor Rajiv had seen coming. The final voice, the hall froze as the doors opened once more. The sound of footsteps echoed against the marble floor. The figure who entered was none other than the former teacher of Sundar, a man with gray hair, simple clothes, and a gentle but steady presence. His name was Krishnan Sir, a teacher who had once guided Sundar in his early years when dreams were fragile and the world was still uncertain. He walked slowly, leaning on a wooden stick, but his eyes carried a light that silenced the hall more than wealth or power ever could. People whispered, confused why a man so simple had arrived in a place built for glitter and pride. Rajiv frowned, irritated at the interruption, but Sundar's eyes softened with emotion. Krishnan Sir looked around, his voice calm but heavy with truth. I was invited tonight not as a guest of wealth, but as a reminder, he said. I taught Sundar when his family had little. I remember Lakhmi walking beside him even when the world did not know his name. And I tell you this, respect is not given by gold. It is built in the shadows of struggle. I stand here as proof that greatness is not measured by the chandeliers above us, but by the strength of those who rise with humility. The hall stirred again, reporters turning their cameras toward him. His words were not polished like Rajiv's, not rehearsed like a politician's. They were simple, raw, and true. Rajiv tried to laugh it off. Another story of humility, he sneered. But does it change the truth of this hall? Does it change power? Krishnan Sir's eyes met his, unwavering. Power fades, Rajiv. The world remembers those who build empires of kindness, not empires of fear. Modi stepped forward then, his voice rising steady and firm. Enough. Tonight has revealed what was hidden. Sundar has shown respect. Lakhmi has carried dignity. And even the smallest voices in this hall have spoken truth. Rajiv, you wanted a vote. Then let us call it, not with hands raised, not with fear, but with conscience. Each of you must decide tonight what you will carry home, pride that fades or respect that lasts. Silence filled the room. One by one, guests stood up. A woman in a jeweled gown spoke first. "I choose respect, I was wrong to judge." Another followed, then another. The room slowly shifted. The same people who had laughed earlier now lowered their heads, admitting silently that they had been blind. Rajiv's face turned pale. His empire of pride cracked before his eyes, not by force, but by voices that chose truth over fear. He slammed his glass down, but no applause followed him now. Lakhmi stood quietly, her heart heavy yet proud. Sundar squeezed her hand gently. He did not smile in victory because this was not about winning. It was about reminding. The journalists wrote quickly, their cameras catching every moment. They knew this story would not end inside the hall. It would travel far, teaching thousands who read it. Finally, Modi placed his hand on Lakhmi's shoulder and spoke gently. Tonight, insult was turned into pride, not because of power, but because of resilience. You did not answer humiliation with anger. You stood with dignity, and that is the strength our nation must never forget. The hall applauded, not with the shallow claps of earlier, but with genuine respect. The sound filled the room like a wave, echoing the lesson that had been written that night. Rajiv left quietly, his arrogance shattered. Sundar and Lakhmi remained, not as conquerors, but as reminders of what true greatness looks like. And as the lights dimmed and the night ended, one truth remained brighter than the chandeliers above. Respect born from humility lasts longer than power born from pride.